Today, we're digging into a 17th century poem that was, secretly, one of the most effective political weapons of its time, John Dryden's Absalom and Achitophel.
So let's just start with a huge question, right? Can a poem, a piece of literature, actually change the course of history? It sounds a little wild, but that's exactly what we're going to explore. You see, back in 1681, England was in the middle of this intense national crisis, and the poet John Dryden comes out with what on the surface just looks like a biblical epic. But underneath, it was a razor-sharp piece of political propaganda, designed to do one thing: defend a king and absolutely demolish his enemies. All right, so let's start peeling back the layers of this poem in disguise, and really unpack what makes it a genuine 17th century political thriller. Now, if you were reading this back in the 1680s, the story would have been super familiar. It's a retelling of a really famous tale from the Bible, the story of the wise King David and his handsome, super popular, but, tragically rebellious son, Absalom.
But here's the trick, right? Dryden was using this incredibly powerful literary tool to hide his real message. He was writing an allegory. And the key to an allegory is this: every single character, every event in this Bible story was a direct symbol for a real person and a real political drama that was happening in England at that exact moment.
And the guy who wrote this, he wasn't just some random poet. We're talking about John Dryden, a total literary superstar of his day. He was England's very first poet laureate, the official historiographer royal. They even called him the father of English satire. And all of this pointed to one thing: he was a fierce, unwavering defender of the king. This poem, this was his weapon.
Okay, so we know the setup. Now for the fun part. Let's crack this allegorical code. It's time to figure out who's who in Dryden's brilliant satire. And this is where it gets really clever. I mean, look at how perfectly these pieces fit together. King David, the wise, patient, God-ordained ruler? That's King Charles II, no question. The handsome but ambitious son, Absalom. Well, that's a stand-in for Charles's popular but illegitimate son, the Duke of Monmouth. And the true villain of the piece, the cunning, manipulative advisor Achitophel, that is a direct, brutal attack on one of the most powerful politicians in England, the Earl of Shaftesbury.
And this contrast, this is exactly the dynamic Dryden wanted his readers to feel. He paints Absalom, that's the Duke of Monmouth, as this tragic figure, not evil, just weak, easily flattered, swayed by his own ambition. But the real villain is Achitophel, the Earl of Shaftesbury. He's the master manipulator, driven by pure political greed, who just preys on Absalom's weakness to get what he wants.
So, what was this real-world drama that was so explosive it needed a poem like this? Well, to put it lightly, Restoration England was basically a powder keg waiting to blow.
Okay, so here's the breakdown. It all kicks off in 1678 with something called the Popish Plot. This was a totally fabricated conspiracy theory, but it created mass hysteria and whipped up all this anti-Catholic fear. That fear then fueled the main event, the Exclusion Crisis. This was a massive political fight to stop the king's brother, James, the rightful heir, from ever taking the throne, all because he was Catholic. The opposition, led by that same Earl of Shaftesbury, wanted the Protestant Duke of Monmouth to be named the heir instead. Dryden's poem drops right in the middle of all this chaos. And, tragically, it even predicts what happens a few years later, the failed Monmouth Rebellion.
So you can see, the country was right on the edge. England had already lived through a horrific civil war just a few decades before. Dryden's goal was crystal clear. He was using his incredible poetic talent as propaganda to defend the king's right to choose his successor, and to shout a powerful warning to the whole nation: do not let these ambitious politicians drag us into another civil war.
But how did he do it? What made his argument so incredibly effective? Let's take a closer look at Dryden's poetic weapon and see how he managed to turn satire into high art. Dryden was an absolute master of something called verse satire. Now, this wasn't just about making cheap jokes. His satire used brilliant wit and irony to expose what he saw as the corruption and the just foolishness of his political enemies. It was mockery, sure, but it had a deadly serious purpose: to protect the stability of the entire kingdom. And his tool of choice was the heroic couplet, basically two rhyming lines with a nice, steady 10-syllable rhythm. But what's so cool here is how the structure itself becomes part of the weapon. That balanced, predictable rhythm allowed Dryden to build these arguments that were sharp, witty, and unbelievably memorable. They were like the political sound bites of the 17th century. They just got stuck in your head.
And guess what? It worked. Shaftesbury's movement completely fell apart.
But beyond that immediate political win, why are we still talking about this poem today? Let's look at its lasting echo. Simple, it's because Dryden was writing about things that are just timeless. The seductive danger of ambition, the incredible power of propaganda and political spin to manipulate a crowd, that constant clash between loyalty and rebellion, and that really fine, blurry line between being a patriot and being a traitor. I mean, these are dilemmas we are absolutely still wrestling with today.
And this is really the poem's greatest artistic legacy. Before Dryden, satire was kind of looked down on, as a lower form of writing. But with Absalom and Achitophel, he just elevated the whole genre. He turned it into a major art form, creating a blueprint for political commentary that would influence legendary writers like Jonathan Swift and Alexander Pope for the next 100 years.
So, it all brings us back to where we started. Dryden's masterpiece was both. It was a stunning work of art and a piece of powerful propaganda, a beautiful poem and a political weapon. Which really leaves us with one big question to chew on. When does art stop being just art and become a weapon?